Morning, everybody. Andy here again. Easter Monday, day 20, I do believe, of doing this. I must admit, when I first started this, I didn't think I'd get to 20, but there you go. So I'd like to keep this up for as long as I can. Depends how long the lockdown lasts. Anyway, to start off, put the figures down there, and the daily deaths yesterday, 737, which means in the UK we've now gone over that 10,000 figure. And the daily album yesterday was the Arctic Monkeys from 2006, already 14 years old, their debut album, Whatever People Say I Am, That's What I'm Not. I think that's what it is. It's Whatever People Say I Am, yeah, That's What I'm Not. It's one of those titles, isn't it? I mean, I just fancy something a bit more upbeat and a bit more modern after playing 70s albums and things like that. But a great album all the same. What I'll talk about today, actually, is yesterday when we were out for our walk, we'd already recorded the video, came home and bumped into a friend. Not literally, because you obviously have to do the social distancing now. Initially, sort of hello over the road, and then you sort of get slightly closer. But that exaggerated social distancing thing that you do nowadays. And we're just talking about how you are, how you're going on, and all this sort of stuff. But one of those things that sort of came out of the conversation was how some people potentially still aren't getting what's going on now. I think most of us, especially the slightly older people, and I will come to this, there's a reason for this, they're saying that, we'll come to that later, but I think we've all had situations where, yes, we may have realised this situation was coming, the coronavirus was coming, we'd heard about it in China, obviously we'd heard about it in Europe, etc. And okay, we can criticise about how governments and politicians have reacted to that and how quickly they did things, and maybe that didn't help, but it still takes the individual person, the collective people, if you want, the community, to actually realise what's coming and the seriousness and the danger of the situation that we're in at the moment, certainly what we're in now. I think there's no doubt that just about everybody now understands why we're in a lockdown situation, understands why we need to do social distancing, why we shouldn't be going out doing unnecessary journeys and type of things like that. And certain things bring that home. I mean, over here in the UK, I think some of the things that helped with that were Prince Charles getting coronavirus, and obviously last week Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, getting COVID-19 himself and ending up in intensive care in hospital in a weird way. That was one of the best things that could have happened. Thankfully, Boris Johnson is now out of hospital and on the mend, but it really brought it home to people. Wow, this is something, this is hitting everybody, that's that great leveler type thing. Okay, predominantly, yes, I know that probably poorer people are getting it because of various reasons, but it's also, I've noticed that the sort of some of the scaremongering or some of those sort of weird stories, conspiracy theories and that seem to have lessened over the past week or so. I can remember at the start, everyone was going, oh yeah, those posting those figures, how many people die of the flu every year, it's no worse than the flu. They've all disappeared. People sending me links to how if you drink lemon juice, suddenly it magically disappears because certain countries do that, and then you post them a link to say, actually, that's not quite true. And all those other, the G5, 5G sort of stuff, and all the masks and how that's now been debunked, and how it's some big government conspiracy and it was created in a lab in China, and all this sort of rubbish. Thankfully, all of that seems to have gone away now, or predominantly gone away now, because we started to realise, because people that we don't see in the news are actually catching this and dying from it. And you're reading now, obviously, about all the thousands of deaths, obviously 10,000 deaths, but all the hospital staff, carers, workers in the NHS, etc., who are catching this by doing their own job, etc., as well. And I've seen it with other people who are doing deliveries and things like that. They're catching this. Transport workers, bus drivers and things like that are catching this and dying from it because of it. But often it takes someone closer to home for it to bring it home to you in lots of ways. And what happened, I mean, I took this seriously, but I know lots of people didn't, and I can understand why, because it does touch you. You don't really realise. Even last week, actually, I had a conversation on the phone with my mother, and somebody who lives in the same sort of blocks of flats that she lives in had said to her, do you actually know anyone who's got this or who's had this, because they were still thinking it's never going to happen here, it only happened in London or big cities around the world, New York or Rome or something like that. And I said to her, well, yes, I have. I know several people who've had it, who probably haven't been tested. But one person in particular, a guy called Roland, who actually put something up well before we went down into the lockdown. The first person that I know personally who had got it, and he actually put the post up on Facebook. And the reason he did that was to say, look, I've had this. I've been diagnosed with this. I know that the doctor has told me that I have all the classic symptoms, and he had all the symptoms and he wasn't well at all. And basically he put it out there, and well done to him, to say, look, I've got this. This is serious, just in case you aren't believing this is serious. I've had it. Obviously, my children and my family have had to self-isolate, and thankfully, they didn't get it. But it sometimes takes that, and I think that helps a lot of people in a way to make it real, because sometimes it needs to be real. Unfortunately, when it comes really close to home is when when you lose a loved one, a family member, or a very close friend or something. In fact, the person we saw yesterday, Wendy, she's a very close friend of hers who's been on a ventilator in hospital and obviously in intensive care. Thankfully, she's now out as well, but it brings it home. And even little things like, you're hearing about sort of celebrities and people that like John Prine, the American musician who sadly died last week. And yesterday we had Brooke Taylor, who's 79, I do believe, but what a classic, really, someone I grew up with in my childhood. He was in a TV programme over here in the UK, for those who aren't in the UK, called The Goodies, and he was a sort of a comedian, writer, broadcaster, did a lot of work in the early days, pre-Monty Python, with people like Eric Idle and Graham Chapman, John Cleese, and he actually co-wrote the very, very famous Four Yorkshiremen sketch, the one that they all sit around and say, oh, yeah, when I was an Ira lad, we lived in a shoebox in the middle of the road, and oh, that's nothing. That was luxury and all that, if you told the kids today, they'd never believe it. He co-wrote that, and that's one of those things that brings it home. But as Wendy pointed out yesterday, in our conversation, there's still a section of our society who still don't seem to be getting this, and that's the young people, because they think they're invincible. We're all like that. When we were younger, we all thought we were invincible. We could never die and everything like that. And unfortunately, there's still a lot of them congregating. I mean, I understand when I was a teenager, and that's a while ago now, I didn't want to be cooped up in my home with my parents, who does? And it's a weird situation, but they are congregating. They're having house parties. They're congregating in the street, in parks, and that. And I've seen news reports locally of it happening with groups having, as I said, having house parties. And I've seen it in America and everything. There was the story yesterday about one where they ended up shooting at a house party, an illegal house party. I don't know what the solution to that is. Once again, as we were saying yesterday, sometimes it would take the death of a friend of theirs to make them realise exactly that it is real, that they are in danger, because obviously proportionately it is the older people who are catching this and who unfortunately are being more ill than others, and unfortunately dying with it as well. So I think ultimately, yes, we should be trying to educate the young. If you're a parent, I know my kids are sort of isolating at home, but ultimately, as I said, all you can do is do yourself, do your own thing, carry on staying at home, carrying on, try and stay safe, do those social distance thing, and hopefully you're not going to get in the way of anybody else. And if you have got those kids, try and impress upon them that they may not get ill, but they will pass it on to other people. But I think they're the last sort of section of society that have got this, which is a good thing in a way, because it doesn't mean that the rest of us are certainly taking this seriously. Anyway, I've spoken for far too long, but one of the things I did want to mention, actually, books. I finished my Ian Rankin book, and the latest book I'm reading is this. Guy called Robert MacFarlane, The Old Ways. It's all about journeys on foot in the UK. He's written several books. I read one of his about mountains, usually about sort of landscapes, nature generally, but landscapes. And it's one of those books. He's a great writer. It's more lyrical, the way that it's written. It's a book to savour, not a book to rush. And I've always been interested in that type of thing. And say the way he writes is very good. So that's the one now. So I'll keep you up to date with other books that I may read in the future in these weird and strange times. Add to the shelves behind here, So anyway, I'll speak to you hopefully tomorrow. Goodbye.